raised by animals. And second is the feed quality or total dry-matter digestibility of a person. Third one is the allowable grazing time, how much time you allocate for grazing. Third one is the time of grazing, the grazing duration, then amount and quality of the feed supplement you provide, then harmful plant substances, and animal live weight, the growth stage, age, and physiological state of animals. They are critically important to estimate the feed intake. And generally, we estimate the feed intake in animals like, let me write here, then it looks like for feed intake kg per day or gram per day unit, sorry, how to this equals hours, raising hours, multiplied by bite rate, number of bytes per minute. Okay, I write number of bytes per minute. Okay, for hour, how do you estimate? It should be 10 multiplied by, sorry, then again it is multiplied by, sorry, byte size. That means uptake it and normally त्यो कति टाइम ग्रेजिङ गर्छौ र कतिवटा बाइट रेट थियो, बाइट कतिवटा बाइटिङ गर्छ एनिमलले र एउटा बाइटमा कति चाहिँ स्वालो गर्छ. This is to be properly estimated. Then you can estimate roughly the feed intake of the grazing animals. Okay, and so please be conformed to the unit. If you say gram per day or kg per day per hours, then byte rate means number of bytes per minute you can estimate. Then byte size, it must be something gram or kilogram, and from this hour you can, from these units you can estimate the feed intake in a grazing animal. Okay, so they are the typical methods, are these manual methods, are the physical observation methods to individual animals to estimate the feed intake. But now there are so many other instruments born and invented for the calculation of feed intake. Okay, so you can use some grazing software, so you can use some machines based on the jaw movement and frequency of walking, lying, or something else. The some physical behavior data, you can estimate the grazing intake or the feed intake in animals. So there are some critical factors affecting feed intake. One is the feed quality. So one example is here. Let us see. At initial stage, or that means during the early stage, there is higher cell content. Okay, but conversely, if the maturity stage, lignin improves and the cell content is lower than the cell wall content, just opposite. So then if we consider the digestibility matters, then here is one good example. It shows in temperate grasses, at least there is 50% dry matter digestibility, while it was in between 30 to 70% dry matter digestibility based on the growth stages of the crop. So then other grain byproduct you can estimate. There are some estimation on the digestibility. So addition or deletion or the removal of the grain byproducts you can estimate based on the nutrient content or the digestibility of the forages on offer. So if the forage has high dry matter digestibility, then you can lower the supplementation of the grain byproducts. Okay, if it is from the tropical origin, it is naturally with lower digestibility, then you can adjust the nutrient content or uptake, or you can improve the quality by increasing the different grain byproduct resources. So then another for grazing animals, it's very important. Then if you offer forage mass, then it might be increase the intake in animals. Okay, this, but at early stage it is okay. Up to 50 gram organic matter per kg live weight of day. This is for cattle. It will be increased. Then it will be rather slow and steady towards this stage. Okay, but normally you can say at given forage allowance level, the feed intake would be increased. Or if you increase the forage allowance, then the forage intake would be increased to a certain level. Then it will be, when the animal is saturated, then it will not eat more. Okay, so this is a common hypothesis, but it never happens, because the gut size of the animals also matters for forage intake, not only the forage allowance. The gut size, that means the rumen size or the stomach size also governs the feed intake in ruminants. Okay, then tropical, this I will not describe anymore here. And if you compare grasses and legumes, and at the given the dry matter digestibility would be similar. Okay, the rate of digestibility would be similar. Okay, but however, for the voluntary feed intake would be increased towards the dry matter digestibility, and this is the most common point we have to consider during for the grazing animals, right? And typically the digestibility of green matter is higher than the dry matter, other than the dry resources. Like if you compare straw and fresh herbage, then the intake of fresh herbage is always higher than the straw. There is another belief: animals tend to select those species those have high nutrient density. Okay, so this is the first principle, and based on this, sometimes the behavior of animals would also be, they also switch the habit from selectors to browsers, or from browsers to selectors. If the feed is not enough on the ground, then the goat as a browser species would tend to grazer. Diameter पुरानो परे उसको बडीमा त्यसपछि लुके गर्छ. That goat usually don't show the behavior of grazer, right? But if the vegetation is low and if there is deficiency of green matters on the ground, goat, even as a feed selector, would show the behavior of, goat as the browsing animal would switch to grazer. Okay, this kind of habit could also be changed between animals based on the feed resource available. Okay, so then for the example also tends to the same to the sheep. Sheep is a normal grazer, right? But if there is plenty of vegetation on the ground, it shows the browsing behavior. It switches the behavior based on feedstuff availability on the grazing land. Okay, then if there is higher digestible organic matter in the forage, then forage intake would also be increased in ruminants. Then at initial stage, the intake would be increased for the green pastures, but it depends to the bolus size. Okay, then ingestion and dead metal, if it is low, then intake will be increased. Then if there is increased selection opportunity available on the ground, then intake will be steady or intake will be lower. Okay, these simple figures you can estimate or you can describe yourself. Then later, another thing is, if the feed has high moisture content, then it lowers the intake of the feed. But energy and protein supplements enhance it. If the feed moisture level bodies of animals tend to consume less. But if there is high density of energy and protein, then animals used to resume it. Or you can simply mix the legumes in this regard to improve the intake. Okay, there are some more examples to be considered, and you can read it yourself at home. This is a simple text. And there is also importance of grazing time, and animals have to graze for longer periods to achieve daily feed intake requirements when the amount of forage and offer and intakes are low. Okay, that means I gave you one example how goat as a browser species tend to grazer, and how sheep as a grazer tend to acquire the browsing habit. It depends on also on the grazing time, not only the forage availability. Okay, then if you increase the grazing time, then it also depends on the vegetation composition and the growth, the maturity stage. Okay, then if you prolong the grazing time, then pasture yield will be reduced. Okay, then that means animals tend to consume more, and there may be some problems of uprooting of some species, the most preferred species liked by animals. Then in the next regrowth period, the pasture yield would also be lower. Okay, so there are some seasonal differences over there also. Then another important factor to be considered is the heat stress. If there is the higher TSI, that means temperature humidity index, the feed intake would be reduced in most of the animals. Okay, mostly people talk about the temperature humidity index, and the temperature humidity index for yak is around 24, while for buffalo is 60. This is maximum tolerable heat and temperature index. Okay, then for cattle it may be around 40. Then it matters the intake. Okay, then a lot of energy is required for sweating and maintenance of heat in the body. And during this period, even if the animals are heat stressed, then there is no more feed intake. Okay? This is a very good physiology behind this. Then other things you have to consider is some other harmful substances present in the feed. The grazing harvest is available. For example, the inorganic compounds is nitrate, copper, and selenium. Then others are organic compounds like tannins, alkaloids, alicyclics, that means saponins, and glycosides. And these mycotoxins are endotoxins available in the feedstuffs. So hungry or stressed animals can die when gorging on a range of plant species that are either intrinsically toxic or toxic at certain times under certain conditions. Okay, that means if you fertilize nitrogen and if you allow animals graze earlier than the expected time, then the small animals, mainly the young animals, would die of nitrate toxicity. Or we don't have the selenium toxicity problem in our country, but some places in western Nepal, mainly the Surkhet area, is believed to be with much selenium content in the soil. Okay, I'm saying it's a toxic level. We don't know it, but we have this information that Surkhet has higher selenium content. Then copper toxicity is also recognized in also grazing animals. So then please compare these figures for concentrate supplied and forage intake, the total intake, and digestible organic matter intake. These all the things could also be increased except forage intake. Right? जस्तो तिमी चरिरहेको एनिमललाई, grazing animalलाई, if you offer concentrate, the feed intake would be reduced. Okay, but the total intake of poor quality feedstuffs would be increased against the concentrate supplied. Okay? Then for these poor quality feedstuffs, mainly the digestible organic matter intake would also be enhanced through the addition of concentrate supplied. Otherwise, in truly speaking, for the high quality forages, if you offer concentrate in more than needed amount, then animals tend to have poor forage intake. Okay? So ruminants by habit, they are with their habit is the food habit is based with fibrous resources. Then if the concentrate is given, the bacteria would be lazy. That means the rumen concentration of bacteria would be lost due to increased acidity. Okay, or when the bacterial population is mismatched, then forage intake would be reduced in most of the animals. Right? खास गरी के हुन्छ जब ब्याक्टेरियाले खाना पाउँछ नि that it doesn't work towards the roughage. Right? So this is also important. Then other things to be considered is the feed supplements. Okay, then please read this figure. Then how voluntary intake matters to the crew, or how crude protein percentage of concentration in the forages improves or declines the voluntary feed intake. Okay, if you are feeding forage only, any fat has high protein content, then voluntary feed intake of these forages would also be enhanced. Or for low quality forages, you can substitute some part of it by some concentrate to improve the voluntary feed intake. So they are just vice versa figures you can understand from these figures. Then there are some the main goal of animal production is improving reproductive efficiency, including production, and increasing the feed intake in general. Okay, but for live weight gains, the feed intake is to be increased, while digestibility is also be increased, and the fatness should also be reduced as a goal. Okay, for milk production, the tendency is more or less all the nutrient scenarios should be increased. Okay, the feed intake should be increased, the protein content of the feed should also be increased, and the digestibility of the forages on offer should also be increased. They are the generalized response in daily grain, milk yield, and wool growth to some feed and animal physiological variables. Okay, so there are some typical differences between the nutrient parameters and the productive stage of animals. For early growth stage, intake should be increased, that's fine, and the digestibility of the forage should also be increased, that's okay, but the fatness should be reduced. Okay, this is the goal. For milk production, and intake and digestibility would be increased, while it depends on the stage of lactation. Early stage, it is increased, while at later stage, by nature, it is reduced. But for wool growth, the tendency is different to that of live weight gain and milk production, mainly in the sheep. All the factors should be increased for the wool growth. The feed intake should be increased. The feed composition should have high protein content that increases. That means if you increase the protein content in the diet, or if there is sufficient protein concentration in the forage, wool growth would be satisfactory at the rate of better digestibility. Okay, so they are the typical differences, and you have to summarize yourself. If I give you this slide, then you have to maintain a rough estimate in your handout. Okay, then there are some production efficiencies measurement of the grazing animals. Okay, there are some other estimates in biological estimates, so empty body weight. Okay, empty body weight भनेको आज तिमीले तिम्रो रुमेनमा केही पनि नरहने. ओके, त्यो कन्डिसनलाई रुमेन कन्टेन्ट चाहिँ तिम्रो जस्तो तिम्रो 16 घण्टासम्म अथवा 12 घण्टासम्म तिम्रो एनिमललाई खाना दिएनौ भने दिस कन्डिसन वुड लेड टु empty body weight, है. Or sometimes shrunken body weight, है. Shrunken body weight भनेको के, empty body weight भनेको के, then how it interacts with feed and offer, that should be read carefully. Okay, so another thing is utilization of energy in the diet for production. Then if the proportion of maize in the diet, here is one example, proportion of maize in the diet is increased, then fattening is also possible in a good rate, and efficiency of maintenance is also possible. right? So the first consideration in feeding is the maintenance of energy. Okay, then that governs all the things for efficiency of protein intake, efficiency of fattening, efficiency of growth, everything that is based on first to the energy concentration. Here is one example from maize. Then another is the utilization of protein in the diet for production. Okay? Then if there is sufficient protein in the diet, then there may be sufficient volatile fatty acids produced in the rumen. Okay, here is another one example. If the concentration of crude protein in the forage is increased, then protein absorbance absorbed by small intestine is also increased to some extent. So there are other considerations for animal production point of view. Then if you choose the temperate grasses, then 80% of the diameter digestibility is possible. And for tropical legumes, the diameter digestibility up to 50% is possible. While you choose tropical grasses, is typically low, while for the digestibility of temperate grasses and tropical legumes and the temperate legume is also low, okay, for gram crude protein per kg of the diameter intake. Okay, there is another way to understand this. Livestock live weight would be increased not only by feeding, but it also increases towards the season and age. Right? Okay, then you have to be considered for making sufficient amount of feed on offer. The next important point is also important. If there is higher proportion of green pasture in the diet, then proportion of green leaf is expected very high. Okay, तिम्रो जति green छ forage त्यति नै green body leaf concentration would be increased, and this is important because mostly the nutrient concentration in the herbage or in the plant forage pasture, what you say, is based on the leaves, okay, in the green leaves. So another point you have to consider is the length of growing season of the forage. Then that if the length of growing season is longer, then animal live weight gain would also be increased, is expected also in a greater way. So next thing you have to consider is the live weight change per kilo kg body weight at diet nitrogen percentage. Okay, because nitrogen is believed to be part of the protein. That means the protein concentration and nitrogen concentration is the similar point. While for protein, phosphorus is also the important part. It has also the same tendency to the live weight gain as that of dietary nitrogen. And thirdly important is the pasture on offer and fat corrected milk. Okay, that means if you have a better amount of pasture on offer, then fat percentage in the milk would also be increased, and same tendency might occur for different vitamins concentration in the milk. Vitamin A, right? Carotene concentration in the milk would also be increased. So then you understand this figure. Then there are some typical differences in the physiology of the milking animals. In early stage, after calving, there is a peak milk yield, and at the same time there is higher feed intake of animals. And at the same moment, the live weight gain is to be increased before the calving. पहिला के हुन्छ? पहिला during the initial stage of milking, then feed intake is also increased, and that leads to further conception, and at this period the live weight is also increased. पहिलो कालबिङबाट अर्को कालबिङसम्म टाइमको जति टाइम छ त्यसको बीचमा चाहिँ there are some rapid changes in the body weight. Okay, then so little figure you have to understand based on the milk yield and the temperature fluctuation on the milking period. That means milking period means the peak milking is after 2 months. Okay, so if your cattle is pasturant on June, then July, August might be the critical period, the peak milk yield period in cattle. Normally that resumes for 2 months in most of the dairy animals. Okay, the tendency is the same for egg, same, and for egg it is only for 1 month, mid-July to mid-August. Right? So for cattle and buffalo, the tendency is the same. July, August is the peak milk yield season, and this peak milk season is also coincided with better harvesting, better pasture growth period. So then the important one is the animal reproduction. Then there are some figures. Then if the pasture allowance during grazing is increased, then post-calving N estrus in cattle would be reduced, and at the rate, the pregnancy rate would also be increased. Okay. So if you go to talk on cow live weight, then body condition score, and there is also same tendency. Okay, if you increase the pasture allowance, live weight will also be increased, and body condition score would also be improved. Let's see who is coming. Shraddha, Sarada. Okay, let us continue to the part. Then another thing is, then if you consider the growth stage and the nutrient concentration in your harvest to be offered to the animal, then at early growth stage the nitrogen retention is declined. Okay, but during maintenance period or after milking, it would be increased. When the more nitrogen is retained in the body, then the growth starts. Again, the body would start. And during pregnancy, it is mass deposited. And at the stage of lactation, it is critically very high. But at late stage of lactation, it is again declining. Okay. So these are the things to be considered: the physiological stage, the nitrogen retention condition in the body, so the milking stage, and the milk composition. Okay, so through forage and pasture you can also change the milk composition. Okay, if you want to more fat in the milk, you can provide more dry matter as compared to green matter. Okay, and if you want to increase the sugar content, you can offer some concentrates, but or concentrates, those are energy enriched. Protein भन्दा पनि energy enriched concentrate खुवायो भने the propionate would be released in the rumen, and that could be applied to form more lactate. Okay, so if you want to increase some protein in the milk, then you can offer with some nitrogenous feed containing with more nitrogen. Otherwise, it will not get benefit. So they are the simple text you have to read, and today's I took very few minutes because it is already studied part, just to remind you from your previous animal nutrition. How to say? What is the name of the course? Animal nutrition and feeding practices, right? That should be submitted on Friday. So let me stop. I will not be available for tomorrow. Okay, is it fine? Right? Or the you allowed certain amount based on some criteria. This is allowance. Okay. Did you get, Kirtik?
Yes, sir. I have sent my question in the chat box, if you would see it.
Okay, changes in animal allowance increased. Are there any other changes apart from live weight and body condition improved? Okay, it is possible, and they are not only the things for to be considered the pastoral ones, but the concentration of feed, protein, and concentration of energy, and other supplements, and weather you have to consider for body conditioning scoring. Okay, Pastor Valansky, this is theoretically accepted for feeding to maintain up to maintenance level, right? But then some other factors. You can just read the text. There are many others. Okay, I give you an example. Temperature humidity index that is not available in this text. There are many others. So I just give you summary text. Okay. When there is god size of animal, it also matters for the intake, not only the composition. Okay, there are some limitations in ruminant science, and the principle is god size is also important part of the that also determines the feed intake. तिम्रो एनिमलले त खान त सक्छ तर उसको स्टोमक साइज त्यसो गर्छ त्यो अनुसारको हुँदैन हैन, and that has to wait for a certain level of digestion. Then after animals again tend to consume, tend to intake the feedstuffs. बुझ्यो?
Yes sir. अनि त्यो फिक्स गर्नलाई हामीले त्यसमा ड्राई म्याटर बढाइदिनु पर्छ सर, ग्रासेस घटाएर के गर्नुपर्छ?
Normally if the moisture content is high or if is high, then you have to increase the drier phase, or you can increase the concentration of energy and protein. Okay, or if the moisture is too dry, that means too bulky, you have to add typically concentrates rich in energy and protein to facilitate rumination. Okay, just make switch in between the concentration. If gram ho hai मैले unit लेखाएर दिन्छु. Just so please go back to my information to feed intake, kg per day or gram per day. Usually kg per day is expressed. Let us say it is kg per day. Kg per day. The grazing hours or the grazing duration, simply say grazing duration or hours, okay, multiplied by bite rate. भन्नाले एक घण्टामा कति पटक चाहिँ ब्राउजिङ गर्छ, that makes a bite, and एउटा बाइटमा कति ग्राम चाहिँ इन्टेक गर्छ. This is the critical point or critical way to estimate on visual observation of animals or the individual observation of the animals. And Saurabh said temperate pasture better than tropical pasture. How? Okay, normally temperate pastures, if you talk to grass, they typically have not less than 15% pure protein. That means temperate pastures, they usually have higher concentration of nutrients than tropical pastures. This is the reason. So who is asking any more question? We have some more minutes. And that is okay. Good question. That is linked very indirectly. That first matters to the moisture content and matters to the nutrient uptake. Okay. If moisture is too high, then its digestibility is poor and intake is poor. And if there is mass, and we talked last time about nitrate, right? And if there is high moisture, then typically the plant uptake of nitrogen is higher, and nitrate poisoning is also be possible. So you can link directly to the agronomical practices, how the plant composition would be changed through soil. These are simple things. Okay. So normally if we talk to nitrate and moisture level, that's usual. They are the usual examples. If you link feed intake or animal performance to soil parameters, soil moisture ko kura garo, then soil nutrient concentration, mainly the nitrogen is rapidly uptaken by the herbaceous. Simple tools. So aruko sa Vijay Lamsal, feeding your animals to increase the body mass. That means lean meat, not the body fat. Okay, this is theoretical approach. Otherwise, for instance, if the growth is terminated, then body starts to deposit fat. So this is for meat producing animals. It's a theoretical approach to be considered. Okay. तिम्रो बडी लाइभ वेट गेन हुनु भनेको बडी मास लाग्ने हो कि फ्याट लाग्ने होइन क्या बुझ्यौ नि
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
है अनि you have to remember the fat and obesity. Okay, fat means by fat it is not the deposition of fat. The meaning is okay. The meaning of fattiness is increase in body mass through muscle protein deposition. Okay, then obesity means this is simply deposition of body adipose tissue and not the muscle protein. The muscle proteins are covered further or replaced with some adipose tissue proteins. They are obese animals. Hey, doesn't mean live weight gain, fat growth. This is associated with increase of body mass, and increase of body mass is due to deposition of muscle protein. You have simply this linear relationship to be considered. Anyone? Next, last question, please.